From the Hill Country in Texas, this is OneRadioNetwork.com.
Well, here we go with hour 2 of our little show. Remember, I'm at your service 24/7. Well, these days when I'm up half the night, literally 24/7. Email me, Patrick at OneRadioNetwork.com. And if I can lead you somewhere, answer a question or two about our business, our shows. I don't do medical advice, but people ask me questions about this or that, and I can maybe lead you to a good show that we've done. Don't forget, we have over 2,500, probably close to 33, I don't know, thousands of shows over the past 12 years. Just put in a particular name or an issue or whatever. Like if you put in 5G on our search function on One Radio Network, probably one of the first shows you'll come up with is the last time we had Dr. Martin Pall on the air, because it comes up in order of when we had the show. Dr. Pall is on the line again. He's a PhD, Professor Emeritus, Biochemistry, Basic Medical Sciences, Washington State University, Pullman, Washington, and he developed chronic fatigue syndrome actually from a virus infection in the late 1990s, and he's made a full recovery by following a program avoiding exercise, diet changes, and taking supplements that decrease inflammation. Of avoiding it. Did I read that correct? That you got rid of this by avoiding exercise, Dr. Pall?
Well, I did a bunch of things, and of course, when you do those things, you never know for certain what's important and what's not.
Right.
But I think in retrospect, I published on the later on the mechanism of chronic fatigue syndrome and many other chronic diseases, and I think what I did sort of fit well with what I learned substantially later. So was that luck or was it just prescience? You can decide that.
Yeah. Do you think there's a deep infections in a lot of these things we call diseases?
Well, I think there's a difference between an infection starting a chronic disease and the infection being sort of the ongoing cause. Basically, I think what I proposed was that the infection produced a big inflammatory response that then triggered a vicious cycle, which was then the cause of the disease. That is, it was no longer the infection. And I think that's true in many cases. So
I see. So the body may get inflamed reacting to a Lyme or some deep stuff that we don't know is there, possibly, and then that inflammation process itself gives us symptoms like chronic fatigue or autoimmune, and then that.
Yeah, well, it involves more than just the inflammation. It involves oxidative stress. It involves mitochondrial dysfunction, a number of other things.
Yeah. And
one of the things it involves is excessive intracellular calcium, which we're going to talk about later in this program.
Yes, we are.
So, they're all kind of linked to each other. And so you shouldn't really look at them individually. You have to look at the whole bunch and how they interact with each other.
Calcium's they're all key, right? They wouldn't be there. God wouldn't have put them there if they weren't all key. But this calcium and the whole intracellular thing, it's pretty magical. Can you explain that to us? Talk to us like we're a young child or a golden retriever so we can understand intracellular calcium.
Well, calcium is a very important regulatory molecule in the cells of our bodies, but normally we keep the calcium levels very, very low in the cell. So typically the intracellular calcium is about 1/10,000th of the extracellular calcium. And so we spend a lot of time and energy keeping calcium levels low, except for very short time periods when we let some in and let it produce a regulatory response and then chuck it out again. the problem with the electromagnetic fields, the EMFs,
Mm-hmm.
is that they activate some channels, which I'll tell you about, and that those allow huge amounts of calcium to flow into the cell. And in most of the effects that are produced are effects that are produced through that excessive intracellular calcium. And they are, and I think quite literally, in the process of destroying us. So that's the simple story to
Yeah.
the EMF.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So if we eat calcium in greens or whatever, or got milk,
Mm-hmm.
or who knows, the body knows how much to put in and when to put it in to make everything happy.
Pretty much, yeah. I mean, in general, it's the regulation of the influx of calcium and what happens subsequently to it that's important. That is, the amount of calcium you get in your diet may have a minor role, but it's only a very minor role, because basically we tend to control extracellular calcium as well.
Oh, we do.
And yeah, we do. And we use the parathyroid hormones, in fact, do that. And not thyroid, but parathyroid.
Mm-hmm.
And so in general, we have a normal range in which calcium levels are maintained extracellularly. And so generally, dietary calcium isn't terribly important. Now, and that doesn't mean it doesn't have any importance, but that's not the main thing that we need to be worrying about.
Do we know the process of how this calcium can end up in the arteries?
Well,
Calcification.
that's something. Calcification.
Yeah.
I really haven't. I haven't researched that, so I don't really know. No, yeah.
Somehow it gets there. It probably thinks it's supposed to be there. Some people conjecture that it's there to kind of smooth out some of the inflammation after the cholesterol does that. That idea. And but who knows? I'm sure there's geeks that figure that kind of stuff out. Martin Pall is with us, PhD biochemistry emeritus. So how did this whole EMF thing start for you? Because were you pretty much focused on the body in different ways other than outgoing assaults on the 5G thing?
Yeah. Well, I was interested in chemical effects as well, and you talked about the stresses of infection, and there are various other things that can trigger chronic diseases, and so it was inevitable that I would be interested in the EMFs, but I didn't really know how they worked.
Mm-hmm.
And what happened was, so I was looking for a mechanism, and I found a review that was published, I think, if I remember correctly, back in 1978 on EMFs and calcium in the immune system.
Mm.
And I looked at that, and two of the studies that were described in there showed that you could block these EMF effects with calcium channel blockers.
Huh.
And immediately that twigged my mind and said, okay, this is very, very important, because it's telling us how the EMFs are working. And so then I went and tried to find other more reviews, or more articles on that discuss calcium channel blockers and what they do. And I found initially 23, and then 24, and then 26, and now I'm up at around 29 papers which show that you can block effects or greatly lower them with calcium channel blockers of the EMFs. And it's a variety of different kinds of EMFs that do this, not just
radio frequencies, not just radio frequencies.
That's right, and they range all the way from millimeter waves that 5G will entail, down through microwave radio frequencies, intermediate frequencies, extremely low frequencies from our power wiring. So
really,
60 hertz to 50 hertz, yeah. And also,
so there was actually research showing that these calcium channel blockers would protect the body from these things.
Well, yes. I mean, let me say, when you do these things, when you do these experiments, and you see you get blockage or or great lowering, that doesn't necessarily tell you that this is useful clinically.
Right.
And that's something that I've heard some evidence that maybe it is useful clinically, but I'm not really free to talk about that. That maybe low levels of these calcium channel blockers may actually be useful. Part of the problem is that these channels are essential for body function, essential for the nervous system, for muscles, for the heart, etc. And so you can't just block them.
Right.
And
but these was a clue for you to do this work. This was a clue.
Well, this was a clue, and then I started looking at other things. I mean, so there was also a big literature showing that calcium signaling was activated following EMF exposure, so that fits. And that you get that among the other effects, you get oxidative stress and elevated levels of peroxynitrite, and following EMF exposures, and and all these things can be explained through this mechanism. So I abbreviate the channels VGCCs to try to, make it shorter so you don't have to, so it's easier to talk about.
Right.
And so basically what is clear is that the EMFs activate the VGCCs, and they do it by interacting with what's called a voltage sensor. So these are voltage gated. They're controlled by the electrical charge across the plasma membrane, and that voltage sensor that detects the electrical changes, as it turns out, when you look at the structure of it, and you look at a couple laws of physics, one of them's called Coulomb's law and another one's called Ohm's law. It predicts that this voltage sensor is extraordinarily sensitive to the electrical forces of these EMFs.
Whoa.
And the forces on the voltage sensor are approximately 7.2 million times stronger than the forces on singly electrically charged groups in the aqueous parts of our body, in the water, which is where most of them are. So most of the charges are dissolved in the water in our body. And so the forces are extraordinarily strong on the voltage sensor, and that I believe is the reason why we react to EMFs that are extraordinarily low intensities. So the industry's been claiming for many years that these EMFs are too weak to do anything, and this is the reason why they're wrong. They, in fact, are quite strong enough to activate these voltage sensors. And part of the evidence for that is that we have still other channels with a similar voltage sensor that are also activated.
So let's see if I understand. The body is designed in such a way with these voltage sensors and sensors in the cells that they are so sensitive that they're reacting to, very much less stuff in cell phones or towers or something a long way away, much more than we've ever realized.
Well,
I've been told.
I think some people realized it a long time ago, but the industry and the regulatory agencies have been completely ignoring this stuff. I mean, it's not like we didn't have an awful lot of evidence. We had evidence, strong evidence, 40 years ago or more on a lot of these things. But it's been a absolutely horrendous situation where the so-called safety guidelines, and that includes, all the safety guidelines from, most of the world. And so the U.S. FCC safety guidelines, the ICNIRP safety guidelines, the EU safety guidelines, the Canada's safety guidelines, etc. All of them do not predict biological effects and do not predict safety. So they're completely bogus.
They just don't.
They don't.
So you're saying that we've certainly talked about the overhead electrical wires and the wires in the home. They can affect us, and of course cell phone towers even 5 miles away, and blah blah blah. Now EMFs, 5G, they all affect our body in some way. Negatively.
In the same way, basically.
In the same way.
Very similar, yeah. And that's what's surprising about this.
Oh.
Yeah.
Wow.
Because, and biology is stunningly complex, and you think, well, and when you look, for instance, at chemical toxicology, how chemicals work, you find that chemicals work in many, many different ways. So it's an extraordinarily complex area of knowledge. This is much simpler. Now, I'm not saying that everything goes through the VGCCs. I think that there are some things, some of these other channels are also activated, as I mentioned. As far as I can tell, they have relatively minor roles, but and there's some other possible targets of the EMFs. But this seems to be the predominant mechanism of action is through the VGCCs, and that's very, very important. And it tells us, and so immediately when you have the VGCCs producing increased intracellular calcium, and that in turn producing other changes like calcium signaling changes and peroxynitrite and free radicals. And one of the things that free radicals do is they activate NF-kappa B, which produces an inflammatory response. So the inflammatory response that we started out talking about right at the beginning of this program is a very important part of these mechanisms. And so when you know that there's a disease that entails these kinds of changes, and there are many, many of them, then immediately it tells you that EMFs are likely to cause it. And so, so it gives credence to observations that argue that the EMFs are causing these diseases.
So it could be a pretty good argument that cell phone towers, beginning with them, and then Wi-Fi and things even before 5G, could be the root cause of a lot of issues with people around the world that nobody's making this connection to.
Well, again, it's not really that nobody's making the connection.
Well, you are.
No, and it's not just me.
Yeah,
I mean,
sure.
There are other people. So let's talk about what's happened with. Let's talk about people living near cell phone towers.
Yeah, right.
There are 17 published studies on people living near cell phone towers, and let me just say, not a single one of them has been done in the U.S. We have no funding for these kinds of studies. We have plenty of money for pushing this technology on us. We have no money to study it in the U.S. And, in terms of public funding. So all these things have been done elsewhere, and every single one of these things show that you get effects. And typically in people living within about 300 meters of a cell phone tower. So that's about 1,000 feet. A large fraction of the population lives within 1,000 feet of cell phone towers.
Sure, these days.
And so that's an issue, and it's an important issue. And what it says is that again, the safety guidelines are completely bogus. The safety guidelines claim, well, we can be within 10 or 20 meters of a cell phone tower, and we don't need to worry about it.
So are you saying that if you can sit in your home and get some kind of reception on a cell phone, that your body's being affected by that some way?
Well, I mean, that's probably it's probably true, but it's yeah. I mean, in general, I think certainly, as I said, people within 300 meters of a cell phone tower are being affected. And in fact, the latest review that was published on this stated, and I believe this is a word-for-word quote, that people living within 400 meters, they were calling these mobile phone base stations, that's the other name for them, were remarkably, there was a remarkable increase in cancer incidence.
400 meters?
400 meters.
How far is a meter? Is that like a yard? I don't know. I should know that.
It's over a yard,
A yard.
So we're talking about, over
500?
1,200 feet. So quarter of a mile, roughly.
Okay. Yeah.
And, most of the population lives within a quarter of a mile of a cell phone tower, right? I mean, and nobody talks about this stuff. I mean, it's all in the open literature. Nothing's hidden here, and nobody's talking about this stuff. It's absolutely stunning, the level of contrived ignorance that we have in this area. It's absolutely stunning. And it's basically, I think, because of the power of the telecommunications industry and their ability to corrupt the media and corrupt the regulatory agencies, and that's where we are.
Yeah,
okay, so that's just one particular type of exposure. I mean, Wi-Fi is also a major concern.
Right.
It is. Cell phone radiation itself is a major issue. Cordless phone radiation is a major issue, and smart meters are a major issue. They haven't been studied much, but what studies we have suggest they're actually quite dangerous. So, and we go around and people think of their cell phones and their tablets and all these kinds of things as being toys, and that they can, put them on Wi-Fi and connections, and you don't have to worry about it. And it's absolutely untrue. And so we have. So we should talk about what the major effects we already have.
Yeah, let's talk about that, and then we'll morph into 5G. Let me just do a quick little break, Doc, and we'll be right back. Stay right there. Patrick Timpone, OneRadioNetwork.com.
Know the Source on One Radio Network.
Talking with Dr. Martin Pall of Washington State University. Dr. Pall, let me ask you this. So say I'm out here in the country and I've got nothing going on. I can barely get a signal. And I go into Austin and I park my car 10 feet from a cell phone tower and hang out there. I don't think anything's permanent, but has that done some things to my cells and the system that is going to change when I come back out here in the country? Do we have any idea? Do you know what I'm asking?
Yeah, I think I know what you're asking. Let me just say first of all that when you're out in the country and you have difficulty getting a signal, one of the things that's happening is that your cell phone is putting out a stronger signal itself.
As it's trying to get it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so,
that's why I don't use it out here.
you're between a rock and a hard place here.
Yeah.
I mean, when you're in the city and you have very strong signal, your cell phone's putting out less, but you're getting exposed to all this other stuff,
right,
including other people's cell phones and all over the place. I think in general cities are worse than being out in the countryside, but there may be exceptions to that where you use your cell phone a lot, but you have very poor service.
Yeah. Well, that's why we don't use them. And boy, landlines are being tougher to even get. Well, I'll never get rid of mine. Man.
Well, they're trying to keep you from keeping them, and that's one
really?
of the things. That's one of the evils in this thing. Yes, that's true. Yeah.
They're starting to take the landlines away?
AT&T has been pushing to get rid of all landlines.
Really? Wow.
And since we live in a very, very
not even a word for it.
Horrible situation. So
help us explain more what's going on in the body. I think our listeners are keen and interested in that.
Okay. So I prepared a document recently, which is on the internet in various places, that shows that the safety guidelines do not predict biological effects and therefore do not predict safety. And it looked at 8 different types of repeated studies. The first type really had to do with reviews of effects that are produced well below safety guidelines in humans and also in experimental animals. I mean, we have huge amounts of data on both. And one of the effects has to do with lowered fertility. So you get changes in the structure of the testis, you get lowered sperm count, you get lowered sperm motility, you get other measures of lowered sperm quality. You have lowered female fertility. You get increased spontaneous abortion in humans and in animals. You get lowered levels of each of the three types of sex hormones, estrogen, progesterone, and testosterone, and you get lowered libido. So all those things are going on, and there are 25 reviews. They don't all review all these things, but they review at least some aspects of each of them, and some aspects of the whole fertility issue. And so 25 different reviews on that. So there's huge amounts of evidence, and of course the industry claims, nothing's going on. Mm-hmm. There are neurological, and those are, by the way, very far along in our societies. We can talk about that later, maybe. How far along the fertility issues are. I expect we're going to see crashes in reproduction, essentially to zero. Probably within a few years, even without 5G. And with 5G, it could be months. The neurological, neuropsychiatric effects, those include sleep disturbance, insomnia, fatigue, tiredness, headache, depression, lack of concentration, attention, cognitive dysfunction, dizziness, vertigo, memory changes, that is, your memory doesn't work, restlessness, tension, anxiety, stress, agitation, irritability. All these things are going on, and they're all caused by multiple types of EMF exposures, and people are just ignoring it. There are also changes in the electrical activity of the brain as measured by EEGs or other methods produced by the EMFs, and those can be produced very rapidly. Many of the reproductive effects we talked about, not all of them, and many of these neurological, neuropsychiatric effects tend to develop cumulatively. That is, they become more and more severe with times of exposure.
They accumulate in the body, the effects.
Well, the effects accumulate.
The effects accumulate.
The effects accumulate, yeah. And they become... And this was shown most dramatically in animal studies where for instance, the structure of the brain became more and more aberrant with time of exposure. And so these are all exposures to EMFs that are well within our safety guidelines. So nothing should happen. And yet what you get is more and more severe effects in these animal brains to the point where they basically, the whole brain structure is destroyed. And so the fact that these, the neurological, neuropsychiatric effects that I read to you a minute ago are so widespread in our societies suggests that we're already very far along this process towards cumulative effects.
Yes, sir.
My fear, and I think, is that within a few years, completely apart from 5G, we will see a crash in our collective brain function. And when we do that, we'll just go into utter chaos.
So you're saying that even without 5G, it's pretty dismal for the species to be able to survive well and for happy.
Well, but not just survive well, but survive at all.
Survive.
At least in our technologically advanced societies. Yes, I think that's true. I think because you can say, well, it's not proven, and we should wait until we disintegrate, and then, of course, it's too late.
That's right.
But what's absolutely clear is that we are taking risks of the sort that no rational society on Earth can possibly take, and multiple risks of existential destruction. From EMFs that we already have, and so. And when and there is at least some reason to think that a lot of the problems that we have that are becoming more and more severe, the problems with homelessness, the problems with
drug use and stuff.
Well, drug use is a very interesting thing because that's another issue. I have not published on this. I've been talking about it. but there is strong evidence that the EMFs themselves are physiologically addictive in essentially the same way as drugs are physiologically addictive.
The body kind of craves getting more of these insults kind of unconsciously?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, just like, so it works very much like drug addiction. So, it turns out that VGCC activation, acting on two of the VGCCs in the brain, are essential. They're essential for drug addiction. That is right at the core of the drug addiction mechanism. Whether you're talking about opiate drugs, you're talking about cocaine, you're talking about amphetamines, you're talking about nicotine. They all have the same basic physiology of addiction, and it is centered on VGCC activation. And that's exactly what the EMFs do.
They activate the VGCC, which is short for, again, tell folks just tuning in.
Voltage-gated calcium channels.
Voltage-gated calcium channels are affected by all EMFs in a negative way, and that's at this.
Well, they get activated.
They get activated. Okay, they get activated.
Yeah.
And then what happens when they get activated? Is that where the inflammation starts?
That's where. Okay, so you open up the channel.
Right.
You get large amounts of calcium flowing into the cell.
Okay.
And the excess calcium then produces these various effects, and those include the effects that are involved in addiction. So essentially, all those downstream effects that we talked about, you get calcium signaling. That has a very important role in addiction. You get increased nitric oxide and peroxynitrite. They each have important roles in even NF-kappa B. We talked about the inflammatory response. That has an important role in addiction. It's really quite stunning what's going on there. So
the science is there. This VGCC that gets activated. This could be a trigger for so many things that we see in our culture, whether it be Alzheimer's or, I don't know, just autoimmune issues or, all kinds of stuff. Everything.
In fact, there's evidence for both of those.
Evidence for both. Wow.
Yeah. So and I haven't published on this either. There are 9 different papers on the there's a database called the EMF Portal database, which is a good database for electromagnetic field studies, and there are 9 studies in there that show that microwave radio frequency EMFs produce autoimmune responses. 8 of those were done in animals, and 1 in humans. And so we have good reason to think that the EMFs, in fact, produce autoimmune responses, and that they work basically by changing the signaling, the calcium signaling in what's called the T lymphocytes. So the T lymphocytes control a lot of the aspects of the immune system, including the autoimmunity. And so we know that we have good evidence that you get this, and we know how you can get it, how it can be triggered by VGCC activation. And so that's, it's amazing how much information we have on these things, really. The same thing is true with Alzheimer's disease. Alzheimer's disease, in fact, all of the neurodegenerative diseases, the excessive intracellular calcium has a key causal role in each of them. In Alzheimer's disease, you not only get that, from EMFs, you not only get that, but you also get increases in the amyloid beta protein, or beta amyloid protein, which is a key causal element in Alzheimer's disease. So, and there were 2 really quite impressive studies that were published out of China, actually, where they took young rats and they exposed them to a series of short EMF pulses, and then they stopped exposing them, and then they looked at when these rats were the equivalent of kind of early middle age or rats, and they all had Alzheimer's like effects. They had high levels of the amyloid beta protein in the brain. You had high levels of oxidative stress in the brain. They had the usual sorts of memory and behavioral problems that Alzheimer's people do. And so all you had to do, I mean, this is absolutely stunning. All they had to do to convert perfectly normal rats into very early onset Alzheimer's dementia type rats is to expose them to a series of EMF pulses. That's all they had to do. And as young rats. So, I think it's reasonable to predict. Okay, so what's happened in human populations? We know that the age of onset of Alzheimer's has been dropping. We know that people age 30 are coming down with Alzheimer's. They're still quite rare, but they are occurring now, which they were never occurring before. And then we have this, this evidence basically that we can get 100% conversion of rats to Alzheimer's rats simply by giving them a bunch of short EMF pulses. So I think it's eminently reasonable that 5G, which is designed to be extraordinarily highly pulsed.
The pulsing,
Yeah.
Well,
it will produce universal or near universal, very early onset Alzheimer's dementias in humans.
Wow.
Now, I can't tell you for certain that's going to happen, but there's certainly a lot of warning signs pointing in that direction. So, what we're doing, as I said before, is we are taking risks of a sort that no rational society on Earth can possibly take.
Yeah, it's an interesting quote.
It's just insane what's going on.
Walk us through,
insane.
Dr. Pall, if you would.
Yeah.
Say you don't have a cell phone. You walk into a coffee shop. They got Wi-Fi. Boom.
Mm-hmm.
Wi-Fi's everywhere. But just say you walk in the coffee shop, and the body's being affected by this Wi-Fi. We know that. What would walk us through the difference between that and then if you walk into Austin where they got the 5G and the effects on the body? Can you help us understand the difference in the technology itself and then also the possible effects on the body?
Yeah, I think in general the effects of Wi-Fi, the effects of cell phone radiation, they tend to be things that at a level when we're not aware of what's going on. That is, the things tend to develop slowly over
We don't
time.
feel it, unless you're real sensitive.
So, we're not really very sensitive to things that develop slowly.
Mm-hmm.
We're very sensitive to things that develop rapidly.
Right.
And so many of us are in complete denial on all of this stuff because of that. That's not terribly surprising, but it is a huge problem. I think we're now looking more and more at very highly pulsed radiation, and the pulses make things much more dangerous. And I can talk about that if you'd like. But
sure.
The point is, 5G is designed to be extraordinarily highly pulsed, and the reason I say that is because it is designed to carry huge amounts of information per unit time. That's the whole rationale for 5G.
Ah, okay.
And the information is carried in these pulsations. So we will undoubtedly have just incredible amounts of pulsation from any kind of a full-fledged 5G system, which is it's designed to interact with millions of devices, all over the place. So there will be undoubtedly extraordinarily amounts of pulsation from any such system, and we're already getting complaints from people from where they turn 5G on, and all of a sudden people who had at least relatively minor problems are now having very, very major problems. So
is this pulsing off and on, and that is what facilitates the excess information?
It's not just off and on. It's a modulated thing where you get you get increases and decreases, rapid increases and decreases.
I see.
And we know these things are important from two different types of studies. We know that there have been a number of review articles that have published 13 published reviews on this, and then many different individual studies where pulsed EMFs, things that go up and down rapidly, are much more biologically active in most cases than are non-pulsed EMFs of the same average intensities. Now, the safety guidelines are entirely based on average intensities. So they don't look at pulsation at all.
Okay.
And so they're missing what's almost certainly the most important thing here.
The pulsation.
And it's completely missing the safety guidelines. And, the interesting thing is, back in the 1980s, the U.S. and 2 other countries actually had more stringent safety guidelines for pulsed fields than they did for non-pulsed fields. And now we're infinitely stupider than we were in the 1980s.
Did the pulse thing start with the smart meters?
The smart meters have a lot of pulsations, but no, everything is pulsed.
Everything is.
But in general, the smarter the device, the more it pulses, and so the more dangerous it is.
Okay.
I mean, it's so for example, the evidence is that 3G cell phones are much more dangerous than 2G cell phones, even though they have much lower intensity, average intensity, but they pulse much more, and that's enough to cause them to have higher effects. And so we're, I have to say, I tell people this all the time. The more I learn, the worse it gets.
Yeah, and as you travel around the world, and you have been, right, talking to people, is there a lot more? What kind of awareness are you finding? Are you finding jaw-dropping stuff and people are really hearing you, or man, this guy's just crazy? Or what are you seeing out there in the world?
What I find is, and I talk a lot at scientific meetings,
sure,
where the scientists are, by and large are listening. So let me just say, the first paper that I published on this, I published in 2013. That paper has been cited 223 times according to the Google Scholar database. That is a lot.
Is that a lot?
Short time period. Yeah, it is a lot. I mean, the average citation level of a paper, a scientific paper, and this typically is over something like a 30-year time period, is 13.
Oh, you mean a cite is when they actually put it in another study?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, yeah, wow.
Yeah.
200.
And so this is being highly cited. So it's been highly recognized from various parts of the world, and that's important. And generally, I find that most people at meetings are listening carefully to this. The other thing that's kind of interesting is I can speak to lay people and with authority. And so when other people talk about these same things, they find that there's a lot of resistance to it. I don't find that.
Yeah.
I really don't. And people that I just run into and ask me what have I been doing, and I tell them, and they're that most people are very interested. I think most people are getting more and more skeptical about the industry claims. Having said that, this whole 5G juggernaut is going so fast.
Yeah.
That it is really going to be an extraordinary thing to block, but I think we have to block it. We have no choice.
And the current administration, I'm sure it'd be the same if it was a Democrat. It doesn't matter. It's not. They're really into it, isn't it? I know President Trump has been talking about it a lot, and so
they're really into it. Yeah,
and really
the FCC, the people at the FCC have been corrupted by the industry. Regrettably, that was true under Obama, and
sure.
It's true now.
Long ago.
It goes back. So
So the FCC and these studies, I read somewhere where the only thing they've ever done is measure the heat from the cell phone on your brain or something. Is that the only biological studies that have been done on cell phone use?
No, it's not. There are actually quite a number of studies that have been done
But that
on
the
cell phones.
FCC recognizes.
Well, I don't know.
What
The FCC doesn't really tell you what they're looking at.
Oh, they don't tell you.
It's not like, some of these regulatory agencies actually tell you what they're looking at, but the FCC does not.
I see.
And nobody's looking at the real science, as far as I can tell, among these agencies. So they systematically avoid these independent reviews, which I talk about over and over and over again. They systematically avoid the literature on genuine cell phone radiation, and they also systematically avoid the literature on genuine Wi-Fi radiation. And what I mean by genuine, I mean the real stuff with all the pulsations. There are also papers on what sometimes are called simulated cell phone radiation, which either has no pulsations or much lower pulsations than the real stuff, and so most of those studies don't show effects. Every single one of the 23 studies on genuine cell phone radiation show effects. In a review that Dimitris Panagopoulos and his colleagues published, I think it was in 2015, they showed that 46 out of 48 studies on genuine cell phone radiation showed effects. So there's this big disconnect between what these regulatory agencies are looking at and what the real science says. And
so when you're using the term genuine, you're using the term where they're really taking in consideration the pulsations and not an average kind of thing.
They're actually measuring what's happening from real cell phones under particular conditions, so the pulsations will vary depending on the conditions. So, it's not, so it's not that it's a fixed level. It's not, because each of these devices are carrying information, and what kind of information they're carrying will determine what kind of pulsations you get. It's not, and some of the industry supporters criticize these studies because they say, well, the EMFs are not well defined. They're not precise enough. We don't know what, and that's true, but that's true of everything we are exposed to. So if you're gonna study what we're actually exposed to, you have that as a problem, and it's an inevitable problem, and you just have to look at what we're actually exposed to, not what the industry wants us to look at, which is a non-pulsed, continuous thing.
What is the argument and the reasoning behind in the cities putting these 5G things on like so close together in the neighborhood? I mean, if they're that powerful, why do they got to be so many of them? Do you know?
Yeah, I do know. Okay, let's look at it in one level, and then maybe we can look at it at another level. Okay. Right. Okay. So the basic argument here is the following: that the millimeter wave frequencies that to be used in 5G don't penetrate well into our houses and other buildings, and so we need to have these antennae very close by, so we get enough power coming into our houses that you can actually access the signal. That's the argument. And the problem, of course, is that when you have something that's so highly pulsed and is also high powered, this is extraordinarily dangerous. And it's obviously particularly dangerous to people walking around outside.
Sure.
Because they're exposed to extraordinary levels. And this is so that's the reason. I don't, so one of the peculiar things about this area is that it really makes no sense for ordinary people to use 5G for anything. I mean, the industry, is putting out all these ads and stuff about, how great this is going to be, and we're going to be able, 5G will,
allow the whole world to get the internet, right? That's the argument.
Well,
too,
I
right?
mean, you can get. Well, and we can already get the internet.
Sure,
I mean,
pretty
it's
much
not a
everywhere
problem.
now.
and the only advantage of 5G is it's quicker. So great, you can download your porn videos faster.
Right.
So what? Is there really a demand for that? I think the answer is clearly no.
Yeah.
The other thing they talk about is you can that you can interact. Your refrigerator can be a device,
and all that.
And it can measure when your particular foods go down, and then order stuff for you immediately so you don't run out. I mean,
of course,
this is total insanity.
Of course.
Now,
yeah.
So it's not at all clear, really, that 5G makes any sense for ordinary people. Period. And it certainly doesn't make sense from the standpoint of the health impacts on ordinary people.
Mm-hmm.
So
there's something else going on here.
Well, so then the question is, what is the main function of 5G really? What is the industry goal here? And I think I don't know how much time we've got.
As much as you want.
Okay. There are a number of articles, including articles in the financial press, that argue that the main function for 5G is for artificial intelligence communications.
Oh.
And these articles, in the financial press are very, they are supporting 5G. I mean, that's, so they have favorable responses, and they say, well, this industry might be a great place to invest in. And on the other hand, there are all other articles that also make this connection with artificial intelligence have exactly the opposite view of 5G. Now, I'm not going to comment on that right now, but what I am going to say is the following. It makes sense to use 5G for artificial intelligence communications in the following way. If you have some situation where you have changes that occur in real time that are important for controlling things, then that information has to be communicated to the computer that's got all the AI software in it.
Mm-hmm.
And you're talking about a huge amount of information that would have to be communicated to the computer in real time. And then that information has to be communicated back to devices that are responding to this in real time. So that requires a huge amounts of information transfer, and therefore 5G, with its ability to transfer huge amounts of information, is an approach that can be used for this purpose. And I think, based on what I've read, that this is really the main function of 5G, is to do exactly that. Now, the problem, of course, is that this radiation affects us. And the other problem is that in the other situation, which is true, is that you can do all of this with a wired system.
You can do it all wired.
And then we're not exposed to it.
You can do it all wired.
You can do it all wired, and you can do it all wired, and you don't need 5G, and you don't need to impact our health. So the way this thing is set up now, today, and is being rolled out now, today, is that with these huge amounts of 5G antennae out there all over the place, this will inevitably impact human intelligence negatively and strongly negatively, and will therefore produce a big increase in demand for AI.
Oh.
Think about that.
Yeah, that's curious.
Think about that.
Yeah.
Now, is this, this no doubt sounds like a conspiracy theory, right?
Sure, yeah.
That's what it sounds like. It is. That's exactly what it is.
Got your tinfoil hat on there,
theory.
boy, yeah.
So the question is it right? And my question for anybody who's listening is there any other explanation that makes any sense for what we're doing?
Yeah.
That's my question for everybody. And I'm not saying that I've made a 100% judgment here, but what I am saying is we have a gigantic problem, and we have to stop 5G.
Yeah. But what you're saying is curious, this idea that if it's just about information, that you could use copper or wired, even if you were going to do some Orwellian thing about connecting everything, medical records, insurance, police records, I don't know, what you say on social media to find out if you're a terrorist, all this stuff that they want to do, the kind of food you eat. You're saying that they could do it wired.
Do it wired, yeah. You can use fiber optics. You can use copper wires.
You got huge bandwidth, right?
And the technologies that are available for that have gotten vastly better over the years.
Sure.
Vastly more powerful, and you have much better security.
Right. Yeah. You can't. Grab it out
anytime you got a wireless device, people can hack into it. You have much more security with a wired system than you have with a wireless system. You always have that, and so it makes no sense whatsoever. But what you see is that the FCC is trying to make it as difficult as possible for wired systems to come in.
Sure,
to the system.
It's working just the opposite. Yeah.
And so whereas what we should be doing is just having wired systems and not having any of this wireless stuff.
Yeah.
And that's true. That's also true for Wi-Fi. We don't need Wi-Fi. It's a little less convenient to use a wired system for internet connections, but they work a lot better than Wi-Fi, and they work and they're much more secure.
But most of the world is walking around in the airport using Wi-Fi, and it's like humans are already addicted to this thing.
Well, yeah,
they are.
We talked about that. Yeah,
they are, boy.
Yeah. So we are living in a nightmare of a sort that is almost impossible to imagine.
Yeah. Let's talk a bit about the satellites. We've read that Musk, other Amazon, everybody wants to put up like 20,000 satellites because we want to get this all over the world in the deep jungles of Africa, whatever. Do these satellite transmissions, the ones up now and maybe the 5G stuff, do they affect us as well? Do we know? Will it affect us?
I haven't really researched that enough. I know there's a lot of concern about the satellites. In fact, I signed this document about 5G and on Earth and space to support them. I don't know enough about the satellites to really say precisely, but let me say a couple of things here, which I think are very, very important, and this has to do with 5G, and it has to do with a lot of other things as well. The millimeter waves that are to be used in 5G and I guess are going to be used in space with these things are waves that where they impact the outer parts of our body much more heavily than things that are internal. There are internal effects of millimeter waves, and that the industry claims can't possibly be there, but they are there. We know that from non-pulse studies of millimeter waves. So the claims that they make that it can't produce effects deep in the body are simply wrong. And I can tell you how I think these things actually work and produce these effects. When you have the but the point is, it is the case that we have relatively large bodies. We have relatively low surface to volume ratios compared with almost every other organism, and that includes even large trees, for example, which have their leaves and their reproductive organs highly exposed. And let me say, EMFs work in plants very much the same way they work in the cells of our bodies. I published on that. What is okay? So I predict that EMFs, and particularly 5G, will produce vast ecological impacts of a sort that we can barely imagine. I think that almost all insects will be killed off very rapidly. In fact, there was there were a couple of patents issued back in 2000 and 2001 in the U.S. for using millimeter waves as an insecticide. They're very effective in killing insects.
Really? They were using them to kill bugs. Yeah.
Yeah.
Huh.
And they're very, very effective in killing insects. Why? Because insects have big surface-to-volume ratios, so they're really heavily impacted by these EMFs. And that, of course, includes bees, which are essential for a lot of our agricultural crops and lots of other things. So I think we're going to have ecological impacts of the sort that we can barely imagine, and we're starting to get reports of some of these things already with the bird deaths, for example, in Holland. I think that that we're going to have collapses of whole ecosystems all over the planet from this stuff. And especially if you have EMFs from space that are sort of blanketing everything, they're just going to be just stunning effects. One of the effects that I think is going to be very important for us is that I predict we will have huge holocausts, huge fires. Why do I predict that? It's because EMFs cause plants to produce very high amounts of very volatile, very flammable terpenes.
Terpenes.
Yeah, you can get like 100-fold increase in terpene production in plants from just exposing them to EMFs. And it's like spraying them with a light spray of gasoline. Think about that.
Yeah. Wow.
I mean, so we're doing so many incredibly stupid things. It is just beyond belief. So, the simple take-home lesson, we have to stop 5G. We really have to stop further rollout of 4G. And we need to start rolling these things back and trying to lower exposures, not increase them. And the other thing we have to stop, I think, is putting radar units in cars so they can drive themselves because of the EMF exposures.
Same thing, yeah.
That generate.
Same thing,
yeah. So, all of these things, all this stuff in the rosy scenarios that are put out by the industry, the problem is they destroy us, and they will destroy us very rapidly, and that's where we are.
So a lot of the once the 5G as it gets rolling, they're probably going to say that you need new technology to adapt to it as well, right? It'll be a nice way to sell more stuff.
Oh, of course, yeah.
Whatever,
yeah.
Smart refrigerator or whatever, smart.
Well, I mean, I don't know.
I
don't know who needs the smart refrigerator.
Well,
I mean, I don't know. It's crazy. It's.
I saw where they have a thing. Check this out. They have a thing actually. I think it's Costco or Walmart, where you can pay, and a guy will come in and actually fill up your refrigerator for you. I mean, seriously, they give him the key.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just nuts. It's like, I tell you what, we humans, man, we have no idea. So, before we go, what kind of real serious pushback and scientific pushback from folks like you that have a potentially of stopping 5G is out there? I mean, are you hopeful that this 5G thing won't even make it more than it is, or not so hopeful, or?
Well, let me put it this way. I have not given up hope.
Okay.
I think that, but what we need now is a real public outcry, because the scientists are out there. The scientists are out there making their points to the extent that we can. I'm certainly not the only one who's doing this. Not at all. Not by a long shot. The problem is that there's not enough political push,
mm-hmm.
and given the amount of corruption that's gone on from the telecom industry, we need a major public outcry here, and that's the only thing that might actually be able to save us. And I think because the way things are going, we're going to be living in a world where the telecom industry runs the world, and most of us will be dead or pretty close to dead, and that's the world we're heading towards. And if that's I don't know that there's anybody who wants that other than maybe the telecom executives, but that's
I think it's pretty safe to say too. I've been in the media for 50 years.
Yeah.
That the same people that own all of the media are play golf and sit and talk with and sit with these same folks. I mean, these guys hang out together, right? And so we're not going to get anything out of the media, the 98% of them, I mean, of truth about this. It's not going to happen. Not going to happen. I guess, but you'd almost have to have a big Senate thing like they did with the tobacco thing, Dr. Pall. Remember that one where they really got the seven dwarfs up there, they called them, and they asked them.
We don't have time for that.
Really?
We don't have time. We're gonna go down. I mean, look, if 5G comes in, I think we're gonna go down in months.
It's that dangerous? Wow, man.
That's I can't prove that that's true, but what I can say is we know that the pulsations are extraordinarily important. We know that 5G will involve extraordinary amount of pulsation, and therefore it will be vastly more dangerous than what we're already exposed to, which is already, as we've already said, quite dangerous. So
you're talking about the frequency of the pulsation as well as the intensity.
The intensity is important also, but I think it's the pulsations make everything vastly more dangerous. I mean, we're basically, what we're talking about with 5G is we're just going to be immersed in this stuff that that we can't get away from it. We won't be able to get away from it, and so we're starting to see effects of and I'm not sure how much of this is 5G and how much of this is other EMFs, but let me give you an example. They've had these 29 different deaths of racehorses at the Santa Anita.
I've seen that
park. You know that, yeah. And they've died basically of two causes. One is sudden cardiac death, and the other is from massive bone breakage.
Oh, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now we know that the EMFs can impact our hearts and produce sudden, at least things that are associated with sudden cardiac death, namely arrhythmias and bradycardia. And now you think about what happens, and so this is now, what happens when you have a bunch of racehorses that are exposed to intermittent various levels of EMFs. High level exposures impacting the BGCCs in the racehorses. Okay, what's going to happen? Well, when they're exposed to high level exposures with a big pulse or something, you activate the BGCCs. You get a lot of calcium going into the cells. As a consequence of that, what happens is that the extracellular calcium drops. Okay. Now, when that happens, what does the body do? It produces higher levels of parathyroid hormone, which then restores the extracellular calcium to normal level. How does it do that? It pulls calcium out of the bones.
Oh, wow.
Now, if you're doing that over and over and over again, it takes quite a while before this calcium go back in the bones and the bone structure can be restored. So what you're doing is you are really massively affecting the structure of the bones, and so racehorses, which of course put huge stress on their bones, are highly susceptible to these kind of massive bone breakage, and that's exactly what's happened in Santa Anita. So I think both of the things that are happening in Santa Anita can be caused by the EMFs. And then when you look at there are a whole slew of antennae at the Santa Anita racetrack, right there.
Oh, I guess, everywhere, right?
Yeah. One of them at least is a 5G antenna. I don't know. There may be more than one, but there's at least one 5G antenna right there. And then there are a whole bunch of other antennae. I don't know what they are. I haven't been able to find out yet what they are, but there are a whole bunch of other antennae right there at the racetrack. And so I think this whole thing is caused by the EMFs, and that doesn't prove that I'm right, obviously, But what it does say is these kinds of effects on the horses are highly plausible effects of EMF exposures.
Well, the whole thing with parathyroid and calcium and bones is really curious. I mean, how often? I mean, millions of times a day, these elderly people fall and, right, they do their hip or their shoulder, and they never get out. They go into these hospitals and nursing homes with massive, EMFs, and they never get out of there. Very rarely do they ever make it out, right? They never make it out.
Well, and we have Wi-Fi in hospitals all over the place.
Sure, of course. Everywhere.
I mean, we are so stunningly stupid in what we're doing. It's just incredible. I mean, you can't believe what's going on.
Stunningly stupid. Can I quote you on that?
Yeah, you can quote me on that. and let me just say, you can't get insurance to cover liability in these areas. And one of the there's a company called Swiss Re, which is the second largest reinsurer in the world.
Swiss Re.
Swiss, and then RE.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's pronounced Swiss Re, and they put out a statement just recently on 5G. Expressing high-level concern about, possible liabilities with 5G. This is in addition to previous statements that they've put out. The first one was put out, I believe, in 1997 on other kinds of EMFs and the liability issues there. So this is over and above their concerns that they expressed earlier.
Oh, so they're concerned about people exposed to 5G getting sick, and they have to cover it.
Well,
no? That
there will be legal liability for this. That's what insurance companies do. They make their money by assessing as accurately as possible what the likely liabilities will be down the road. And so
legal liability for the legal liability for the technology company. That's what they want. I'm sorry.
Well, the technology companies would love to have love to have insurance, but they can't get it.
They can't get it.
And you can get some insurance for EMFs, but it's very expensive, and it's the type of insurance that could be canceled next year if you want it, and the courts have changed their position. It could be canceled, and you'd be left with nothing. So, basically. Have the technology companies gotten a blanket immunity as the vaccines company have with these things? Do you know? They are pushing for it in the Congress. I don't think they have it yet. But they have it. But they have some. They have some protection, but not complete protection, I believe, at this point. But they're pushing to have complete protection, and of course, they're lackeys in the Congress who are trying to push this through. So we have and what happens, for example, when an organization wants to have Wi-Fi put in to their location, and this could be a school board, could be a hospital, it could be anything, and they have to sign a form for the company, basically accepting the liability. The people that let them in? Yeah. Oh, wow. People. Personal responsibility, huh? Yeah. Yeah, they have to accept that in order to get the Wi-Fi in. So we've got school boards all over the country that have had Wi-Fi put in, where the school boards are liable. Because the companies that put them in are not liable. I mean, how can people be so stupid to sign these kinds of things? That's the question. And you can sue them personally too. There's ways to do that if you want to do that. Yeah, exactly. Did you see the California school that turned off the thing did you see this? Sprint has turned off a transmitter from a tower. 4 students and 3 teachers at Weston have been diagnosed with different forms of cancer, and they got the Ripon County School District
they're getting Sprint to take this thing out. That's a pretty big deal, I guess. I don't know.
Well, it is, except it's one of
billions. Yeah, billions.
It's one of many things. I mean, I went and testified a while ago at the city council here in Portland, Oregon, where I live.
Oh, did you? Yeah.
No, I'm sorry. This was at a school board meeting, actually. And this was a school board meeting. And one of the questions I got by one of the school board members was, well, if we're going to leave these in, where should we leave them in,
Where are you going to put them, right?
And so, they weren't going to consider taking all of them out, but they might consider taking some of them out. It's interesting, the kind of and the problem is that we have right here a mega crisis of a sort that we've never seen before, with the sole exception of the threat of instant nuclear annihilation.
Yeah.
And yet we're still looking at it in a very much business as usual kind of approach, and that just simply doesn't work.
Well, we have a lot of work to do, Professor.
We do.
Well, good for you, and keep at it, and we'll keep at it here, and everybody listening, share this podcast with people. And I think you're right, until enough people just say, I don't want this stuff, it probably is not going to stop.
I think it's not just I don't want it. We cannot tolerate.
We can't tolerate it.
We can't tolerate this. It's time to stop.
Yeah.
At a minimum, insist that nothing go in until it be tested biologically for safety, because that's the problem we have. None of these things are tested biologically for safety. None of them.
Yeah.
Period.
I wonder if there'd be some space there at the local level of counties and cities where enough people got in there and said, listen, we don't want these things in there until you biologically test them. I mean, there might be a way that people could do things individually rather than try to take this thing on, eat the whole elephant at a time.
Yeah. I mean, the problem is that the Congress and the FCC so far has been very much on the other side. I think the Congress is starting to change now, but the question is it too little and too late? And I certainly hope it's not. But we fought this battle here in Portland on 5G, and we lost.
You lost?
Yeah, we lost.
With guys like you testifying. I mean, you were right there in the belly of the beast. And you lost.
Yeah. Made no difference.
Yeah, they didn't care.
Made no difference. You tell them all this stuff. I communicated. They don't give you enough time to talk.
Sure. Yeah.
And so I sent all kinds of written information, and as far as I can tell, it made absolutely no difference.
Yeah, they weren't having it. Well, Professor Pall, thanks for all your time. It's just been great having you here again. We'll keep in touch and follow your work, and so you're just going to keep at it, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. After what we heard the last 90 minutes, I wouldn't suspect less. Thank you so much. Do you have any websites right before we go
I don't,
to turn people on to, or we have a lot.
You can find a lot of the things that I've written on websites.
Sure.
You can
just Google your name. Yeah.
You can just search under my name and electromagnetic, and in some cases other things, and you'll find a lot of information. Yeah.
Martin Pall, who's managed to survive up in Portlandia all these years. It's good for you.
Well, not all these years. I moved here after I quote unquote retired.
Oh, I see. Yeah. Well, it's a beautiful.
This has all been all my EMF studies have been since I retired. That's
Well,
the 8 papers I've published, the other documents I've written, the 48 different invited professional talks that I've given on this stuff, et cetera, et cetera. It's all been since I retired.
And folks, if you don't think this is real, I can remember, Professor, 25 years ago, I talked with Dave Stetzer up in Wisconsin, and they proved that just the ground voltage, from ground voltage from the going back to the, they use all this stray voltage they call it, going back to the power station, affected the milk production. This is 25 years ago, so they know. I mean, we've been looking at this stuff for a while, and this stuff does affect everything. And as you said, plants and animals and all of it. Well, we do what we can, sir. Thanks again for spending so much time with us.
My pleasure, and thanks for doing this.
Yes, sir. My pleasure.
Yeah.
Martin Pall, Ph.D., Professor Emeritus, Biochemistry, Basic Medical Science, Washington University. Well, it's good to get some real geeks on the show, and God love him for the work that he's doing. Just Google his name if you want to learn more about it, and pass on these links to everyone that you care about. I'll see you tomorrow, Open Phone Friday. I love you all very much. If I can help at all, email me, patrick@oneradionetwork.com. Not far from my little computer. Yeah, my little brain is addicted and like yours. And we'll see what we can do to help you with questions or comments. And I'll see you tomorrow, Open Phone Friday. I love you all very much. Thank you, and may the blessings be.
From the Hill Country in Texas, this is OneRadioNetwork.com.